Welcome, everybody, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon. My name is Tarek Masoud. I am a professor at the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, and I'm the faculty chair of our Middle East Initiative. And it's my great pleasure to welcome you today to the second in this semester's Middle East Dialogues, which we have been describing as a series of conversations with individuals who hold vital and varied perspectives on the conflict that is currently underway in the region and the paths towards a more peaceful and prosperous future for the long-suffering people of that region. Our guest today is somebody who has long been on my list to participate in this series, someone I consider a personal friend, in addition to being someone who is a forceful and articulate exponent of the Palestinian position during this very costly conflict, and that is Dr. Husam Zomlot. Dr. Zomlot has been the Palestinian envoy to the United Kingdom since 2018. He has quite a storied career that began almost 50 years ago in a refugee camp in Rafah. He graduated from Birzeit University with a bachelor's degree in economics, earned a doctorate in political economy from London University. And I got to know Dr. Zomlot when both of us started at Harvard University in 2008. Dr. Zomlot was a fellow at Harvard's Belfer Center. And he was here for 3 years, after which he had a quite meteoric rise in Palestinian public service. He was a spokesman for the Palestinian delegation to the United Nations. He taught at Birzeit University as a professor of public policy and served as a strategic advisor to President Mahmoud Abbas, a member of the Revolutionary Council of Fatah, which is the political movement of which Mahmoud Abbas is the leader. And he was designated envoy to the United States in 2017 before becoming envoy to the United Kingdom. He is a scholar and a diplomat of extraordinary skill and eloquence, and we are tremendously grateful to have him with us today. Today's conversation will proceed as follows. Ambassador Zomlot and I will speak for about 45 minutes, and then we'll open the floor to members of the audience with an aim towards concluding our engagement today at around 1:15 to 1:20. I should let everybody know that the event is being recorded and will be posted online. So if you ask a question, just note that by doing so, you are consenting to having your voice and visage recorded and on the internet for the remainder of the human experience on this planet. So at this point, if we were in a room together as opposed to being on Zoom, I would ask everyone to join me in welcoming Ambassador Husam Zomlot. There would be thunderous applause, but unfortunately, that's one of the limitations of Zoom, is that our audience is unable to, at this moment, express their extreme pleasure at having you with us. But know that the sentiment is absolutely there. Welcome, Husam.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Tarek Masoud, my good friend Tarek, for this very appreciated opportunity.
Well, thank you. We know how busy you are, Mr. Ambassador. So let me just start in a way that's slightly uncharacteristic of how I've usually done these events, but that recognizes the fact that I've known you for 15 years. We started here at Harvard. I stuck around to be a humble college professor, whereas you started striding across the world stage. But you know, in addition to being my friend, who I've watched from afar just achieve extraordinary things, you also are someone who is from Gaza. Your family is from Gaza. You have family there now. And so I did want to start by just asking you, how is your family and how are you?
Well, it's been very difficult, overwhelming, exhausting, draining at all levels and at many levels. No one would have expected what has been taking place for the last 14 months or so to happen. No one expected that in today, in this age and time, we would see mass murder, mass destruction, the use of starvation as a weapon of war, the use of the lack of medical treatment as a disease, as a weapon of war. So it's a very hard moment for people like you, Professor Masoud, and all our students here, but let alone if all that is about your own people and your own family. So it's been difficult, and of course, difficult most to our people there. We are following, watching, trying to do what we can, feeling despair, feeling anger, feeling hurt, feeling trauma, really. But they are going through a war of extermination. So my family has been affected directly. I have lost several members of my own extended family. But so is every single family in Gaza. And that's when you know it is a war of extermination. It targets everyone. It is a mass violence on everybody. And not just lives. And we've lost more than 100 from my own family, extended family, and my wife's. And if you remember the famous image that shocked the world of a girl dangling outside her home, her name was Sidra. That's the first cousin of my wife.
Sidra Hassouna.
Yeah, Sidra Hassouna. That's the first cousin of my wife. And only a few days ago, I lost another child of my family, Munir Zomlot. He was 5 years old. He was just playing in his home when an Israeli airstrike hit the home opposite their house, and the shrapnel penetrated his very small young skull, and he succumbed a few hours later to his wound. So the loss of lives is unprecedented, but also the loss of livelihoods. So my extended family, so is every other family in Gaza, has seen unprecedented levels of targeting livelihoods. Livelihoods means the destruction of homes, of schools, hospitals, universities. I'll give you just one example. Now, the UN documents that more than 66% of Gaza's structures, all of the structures, have been decimated. Now, of that, 70% are homes, gone, 80% are schools destroyed, 90% are hospitals bombarded, and 100% of universities. You and I are shared a long time at a university, and the significance of universities. All universities in Gaza has been destroyed. So it is rather a very difficult moment for a nation to go through this. And the biggest injury for a nation is to go through such a mass murder and what the International Court of Justice described as plausible genocide. And now Israel is on trial for the crime of all crimes, for committing genocide in Gaza.
Thank you, Husam, for sharing that. So, I'm going to do one thing that I don't typically do, which is, just state where I stand on these issues, because as the ambassador and I have agreed, I'm going to try to conduct as tough an interview as one can conduct of a friend. My own view is, given what you have described and what has been documented, is that we are now well past the point where there should be a ceasefire. We could disagree about Israel's response to what happened on October 7th. I happen to believe that it did have a right of self-defense, but that has been, we are well past that now. And so I am very eager for there to be an immediate ceasefire. And so I will ask you, Ambassador Zomlot, last week, President Trump was elected to a second term. And he has made noises about wanting this conflict to end, noises that you could say are adjacent to the call I just made for an immediate ceasefire. He's also the man who moved the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, who recognized Israel's annexation of the Golan Heights. He's the one who proposed a deal of the century that you, Mr. Ambassador, called, quote, one of the biggest scams in modern history. On the flip side, this is also a gentleman who said to an Israeli reporter, Barak Ravid, about your president, Mahmoud Abbas, he said, I thought he was terrific. He was almost like a father, couldn't have been nicer. I thought he wanted to make a deal more than Netanyahu. So how are you feeling about the Trump administration and about what it might do to end the conflict?
What matters here, Tarek, is is the policy side rather than individuals and personas and all that. And, there is a very clear written in stone policy by an international consensus. That policy has been there for years. That vision that has been written also in international law in numerous UN Security Council resolutions. And that has been the long-held US policy. And that vision is very simple. I mean, we need to see an end to Israel's occupation of Palestinian land. We need to see a dismantlement of all the illegal settlements. And we need to see third parties to help in that direction. By the way, that was the ruling of the International Court of Justice. It was a very clear-cut ruling. And I'm sure with us today, there are students of law and maybe experts of law. The International Court of Justice is the highest judicial entity we have in this globe, and we established it as a community of nations for that purpose, to look into issues between states. And therefore, the ruling is very important. Israel's continued presence in the occupied territory is unlawful. Israel's illegal settlements are unlawful war crimes and must be dismantled, and all these settlers must return, evacuate. And thirdly, all third parties must cease to provide any legal, political, or material support to Israel's illegalities. Now, this is the international consensus. That's why I'm quoting the International Court of Justice that was voted in the UN General Assembly with overwhelming support by world nations, except one member state of the UN. That is Israel. That is Israel. One exception. And it's very clear what Israel has up its sleeves right now. It is happening in Gaza. It is happening in the West Bank. It is happening in Jerusalem. What they're doing in Gaza is very clear. Some people say Israel doesn't have a plan, doesn't have a strategy. Look, it's, what is the end game? No, it has a plan. And the plan is to depopulate Gaza. And now they have completely depopulated the north of Gaza. That's more than 1/3 of an already very small territory that is the most dense on earth, and the statistics, and they are going house by house. You asked me about my extended family. Most of them live in the north of Gaza, killing actually the male population, the male members of any family, and leaving children and women to go through that death march towards the south, because death march means that they are still being bombarded and airstrikes while they are going in that way, and many of them are losing their lives. And then the plan also is to keep pushing and pushing. So Israel has a permanent military presence in Gaza, permanent. They are building infrastructure, they're building roads, and what have you. And they're doing the same in the south, by the way. Rafah, the city of my birth, is also being depopulated, is being destroyed completely. So they squeeze our people right in the middle, the 2.3 million people right in the middle of Gaza. And the eventual plan for them in Gaza is very clear. It is the mass expulsion. It is the repeat of the Nakba of the 1947-48. But in the West Bank, you may have heard Smotrich, who is the finance minister, effectively is the landlord, between parentheses, of the West Bank, of the occupied West Bank. He declared 2 days ago that Israel will annex the occupied West Bank by 2025. That's next year. He hints that because of President Trump assuming office, starting the inauguration and all that this is the year that they will annex the occupied territory. So why I'm describing all that, Professor? Because this is the time when we press ahead with a very clear vision and isolate that very clear anti-peace, anti-resolution, which comes only from one direction, Netanyahu. If the new administration in the White House would go with the international consensus, would go with the promise of President-elect Trump himself, because I have heard him, so did the world, during the election campaign, promising two things, and he repeated these promises. He promised to stop the killings, and we would be with him in that, and the killings must stop. That's the top priority. Enough is enough. And he promised to bring peace to the Middle East. However, this is an opportunity to say that peace on the Middle East or in the Middle East must be based on international consensus, on international legality, and it cannot be dealt with from the prism or the angle of persons and individuals.
I'm gonna try to channel what I think an Israeli or somebody who is more sympathetic to Benjamin Netanyahu's policy might say in response to what you just offered, Mr. Ambassador. They might say the following. They would say, look, October 7th was a very clear demonstration of what would happen to us in Israel if the quote-unquote international consensus that gives sovereignty to the Palestinians over the West Bank and Gaza is acted upon, and that what people are not recognizing is that Palestinians do not accept any Israeli sovereignty in any of the land between the river to the sea, and any piece of land where Palestinians are allowed to govern themselves will become a staging ground for gruesome attacks against Israeli civilians. And so consequently, Israel has to do what it's doing in Gaza. It has to make Gaza completely open before the Israeli Defense Forces. Otherwise, the alternative is just continued October 7th, continued bombings, etc. How do you respond to that?
Number one, we leave the 7th of October and the events of the 7th of October to the ICC, because we, the state of Palestine, recognized by the majority of the world, are members of the ICC. We ratified the Rome Statute, and we asked the ICC, that is the International Criminal Court, to investigate any war crimes committed in the occupied land of the state of Palestine since 2014. So we want them to investigate all war crimes by anybody, all through. And we said that we will fully respect the provisions, the ruling of the International Criminal Court. Now, guess who blocks us from that? It's Israel and its backers. And you know what? Go and visit US Congress resolutions, laws, legislations to prevent us from going to the ICC. In fact, you quoted that I was the ambassador to the US. The Palestinian Mission to the UK was shut down because the PLO actually acceded to the Rome Statute and went to the ICC. That was the legal pretext. You see the punishment.
So why the mission to the US was shuttered?
Yes, to the US was shuttered because we went to the sought justice and accountability at the ICC. Now, the question here, why Israel is so obsessed and blocking us? Because Israel knows once this matter reaches international judicial institutions, once it reaches the highest court in the globe, they know that they will be in the red. They know that they will be accused of committing war crimes for 76 years. Because international law is very clear, very clear. And international law does distinguish between a just war and justice in war, i.e. a just war that people have the right to defend themselves if their land is being stolen, if their rights are being denied and blocked, etc., etc. If they are subjugated, if they are oppressed, the people have the right to resist. But justice in war means that there are rules of how do you do that. And that's why we have committed completely and utterly to the provisions of international law. But I refer you back to what the UN Secretary General said about the 7th of October. He said that this did not happen in a vacuum. And yes, he was right, because on the 6th of October, already the UN has reported that that was the deadliest year for Palestinian children on record in the West Bank. I'm not talking about Gaza, Tarek. I'm talking about the West Bank, the deadliest. And I don't need to tell you what was the context in which all this happens. However, we leave the actual situation to the international courts to deliberate and come up with a solution. And when we see members of the US Senate and members of the US Congress sending a letter, open letter, to the ICC Prosecutor General, literally blackmailing him, threatening him, a mafia-like, Sopranos, telling him if he pursue Israel in the court, they will go after him and his family, after the families of all the judges. Unbelievable. So the answer to your question must be in The Hague. The Hague, i.e. the ICC, must come out and answer all these legal questions, because we need clarity, and all of us need clarity in this regard.
Just so that I can make sure that I properly understood Your Excellency's answer to the question, which was really about, how could, we guarantee to Israelis that things like October 7th wouldn't happen again. What I understood you to be saying is that, number one, October 7th and that kind of terrorism is a function of the occupation. I think I understood you to be saying that. The second thing I understood you to be saying, but maybe a little bit elliptically, is that though Palestinians, in your view, have a absolute right to defend themselves against the occupation, there is not an unlimited right to do anything in the course of self-defense, and so you are open to an investigation of what happened on October 7th for violations of justice in the conduct of the Palestinian right, in your view, to resistance. And so the way Your Excellency answered that question, just illustrates the difficulty that Hamas poses. Your Excellency didn't say, for example, October 7th, Hamas absolutely committed crimes, and those crimes needs to be held as accountable for those crimes, as Netanyahu needs to be held accountable for his violations of the rights of civilians in Gaza. And so what I kind of want to do is talk a little bit about Hamas, and so that our students and the people watching this can understand how you, a Palestinian official, views that organization, consequently how we should. So there's a big debate about Hamas. There are some who say this is an organization that has to be part of the governing formula in Palestine going forward, that there's no solution to this problem that does not include Hamas. There are others who say that Hamas is the equivalent of Daesh, of ISIS. It's a terrorist organization. Marco Rubio said it has to be eradicated. David Brooks of the New York Times last year wrote that, quote, if this war ends with a large chunk of Hamas in place, it would be a disaster. Now, I'm assuming that you don't agree with people like David Brooks or Marco Rubio, but what does that mean? Does that mean that you think Hamas should be part of the government, that it should be part of the solution?
Well, I think what we need to focus on is what are the forces that take us forward right now. That's the most important thing. And how can we build a pathway towards the desired results or goals, so we don't get lost in details here. However, I told you very clearly that we are the ones who wanted to hold everybody accountable as a state of Palestine. And I said clearly, everyone accountable. But we are blocked by Israel, because Israel and Washington, Israel and the US, they know the clarity of international law. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, like every other country, we have people, we have a land occupied, and we have a functioning national institutions. We have the state of Palestine that is recognized by the majority of the world, that has a seat in the UN. Because of the US veto, we are not a full member state, but we are a state in the UN, and that state has a government, and that government is the PLO, is the Palestine Liberation Organization. By the way, you mentioned that I was part of the team in 2011 when we went to the UN. When we submitted our application to the United Nations, we clearly stated that the government of the state of Palestine is the Palestine Liberation Organization, is the PLO, and the PLO is the umbrella that represents every Palestinian. Now, that umbrella remains. You speak to me today from the PLO office in London, because the UK recognizes the PLO as the sole legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. So does the US, by the way, until the first Trump administration shuttered our office, but it was the PLO office. The PA was established by the PLO to undertake the responsibilities of the PLO under the Oslo Accords. So the PA is not an entity that represents all Palestinians.
Should Hamas be brought into the PLO?
And therefore, The Palestinian people will have to decide that. The Palestinian people will have to decide that, and we will not allow for any, outside interference in this. The only source of legitimacy for us is the Palestinian people. Now we are going through genocide, so it's very difficult for us to convene democratic process, but we have been convening democratic processes over the years. And one day we will have to go back and refer back to the source of legitimacy to their owner, to its owners, which is the people of Palestine. So it's the people who decide. And Hamas is part of the social and political fabric of the Palestinian people. And all those who say that we need to eradicate this or eradicate that, I don't think this will take us forward, because what about Smotrich and Ben Gvir? What about Netanyahu? What about the Likud charter? Tarek, what about the Likud charter that clearly states that Israel is from the river to the sea? Should we eradicate Netanyahu and the Likud? Mr. Rubio need to answer me there. What about Smotrich? And every single, and now now they are calling the shots. Those are not just non-state actors. Those are the state actors. You're speaking to me about a non-state actor, that is Hamas. What about these state actors? So this is not a conversation that will lead us anywhere. This is just take us backward. And we should be absolutely adamantly clear that we should not look backward, because if we look backward, it's all about Israel's atrocities, crimes against humanity. And that's why it's crucial. And I advise the Israelis not to be obsessed about security only, because this is the wrong way to go. Security is an outcome. It is not a precondition. It's an outcome of resolution. It's an outcome of acknowledging what happened to people. It's an outcome of realization. It's an outcome of admission. And it's an outcome of acceptance of people's rights. You cannot, no way in such a situation of gross denial of people's basic rights, the right to self-determination, the right to go back to return to your homes and properties, to your farms, to your lives, and the right to be equal under any law. And you know what is happening right now in the occupied territory, in Palestine, in the West Bank. It is a combination, a complex system of military occupation, of colonialism, and of apartheid, very well documented by the Human Rights Watch in the US, by the Amnesty International here in the UK, by Israeli human rights organizations, B'Tselem, and numerous Palestinian human rights organizations and other international institutions. So in the face of this, it is us who need to answer the question about the right to self-defense. And I have been saying this, that of course countries, states have the right to defend themselves, but once they have defined their borders, what Israel is doing in Gaza and the West Bank and Lebanon now is defending its expansion. It's defending its colonialism. It's defending its apartheid system in the West Bank. It's just defending this supremacy that the likes of Smotrich and Ben Gvir wants to impose on the Palestinian people. That does not bring security, Professor Masoud. What brings security is the realization among Israelis that they cannot do this permanently.
Yeah. So, Your Excellency, I mean, I don't think I disagree with your evaluation of Ben Gvir or Smotrich or even Benjamin Netanyahu. But I do want to just try, if I can, to help our students understand something. So, the question I'm asking you about Hamas and why Hamas represents such a conundrum for those of us who are observing this and our students is because what many people remember about Hamas is that this is an organization that in 27 mounted what many people would describe, I would certainly describe as a coup against President Abbas, expelled your group, Fatah, from Gaza entirely. You can watch videos online of the extreme violence that Hamas used against Palestinians, the famous videos of Fatah operatives being thrown off of buildings. And so I think a student might look at your Excellency and your statements and have some trouble understanding it. They would think, well, wait a minute, why doesn't this person who is from Fatah view Hamas as usurpers in Gaza, people who have only brought ruin to the Palestinians and to the people of Gaza. Why is this clearly very eloquent, humane, highly educated, and urbane representative of the Palestinian people, whose own group suffered at the hands of Hamas, not willing to come out and say, Hamas is a terrorist group, what Hamas did is wrong. However, that does not negate the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people and their struggle for freedom. Can you help our students understand that puzzle?
Well, of course, we have our disagreements and our issues, big issues with Hamas, and it's public. It's not a secret. And what you just described, the coup d'état, has been the bleakest moment in our history and had really severe consequences on the standings of our cause nationally, regionally, and internationally. And of course, we've been at it trying to resolve this issue. But you asked why an individual like me would not focus on Hamas, because a person like me, Tarek, would want to focus on the root cause that created all this. I don't believe that Hamas is the cause of the conflict. I believe Hamas is an outcome of the conflict. And we need to resolve the root cause. That's number one. Number two, since that coup d'etat happened, since the situation and the division in 2007, it was Israel and the Netanyahu mindset that has been feeding this division. And you know the history. You know that Netanyahu has allowed sacks of cash every single month, millions of dollars, to come through his own military checkpoints and offices. Because he said it in the Knesset himself, Netanyahu. He said, I am doing this because I want to keep the Palestinians divided, divide and rule, all that. And, I want to break the backbone of any possibility of a Palestinian state. So we realize all that. But that's why we want to focus on the root cause, because the superstructure that is creating all this is Israel as an occupying power. So yes, indeed, I want to focus on it, because I know there will not be resolution. There will not be the real democracy for the Palestinian people without liberty, without liberation, without freedom, without sovereignty. We have been trying for a long time. And once we do that, once we visit the root cause, then the Palestinian people will choose political representatives based on their best interest, like everybody else, not based on emotions or reactions, or feeling hurt, or voting with your feet, but you will vote with your brain and with your heart. So if indeed you need to help me focus on the root cause, because for a long time, the international community, some in the international community, because Israel keeps feeding that logic, focus more on the symptoms, or only if we have a better leader in the Palestinian side, only if Hamas doesn't exist. Before Hamas, it was Fatah. By the way, do you know that the PLO is still designated as a terrorist organization in the US as we speak now, despite the fact that the PLO signed the Oslo agreements in the White House in 1993, despite the fact of decades of cooperation, collaboration, aid coming from the US, ambassadors like myself coming and going. Despite all that, we are still designated as a terrorist organization. Do you know that Nelson Mandela was designated as a terrorist person in the US until the year 2008? Until the year 2008. So we don't want to get into these things. We want to be and behave and act like statesmen. Be set on the goal and walk towards that goal without all this Israel's, attempts at distractions and diversions. And look at this and look at that. And only if we have that. The issue is very clear. It is a military occupation that has got to end. No matter how you dance around it and you try to, abracadabra, the abracadabra, like, oh, the issue is there. The issue is there. Look up. No, I'm not looking anywhere. And
but Husam,
I invite you and your students to be set like I am, to focus on the real issue.
But, Husam, and again, just to be transparent, I'm inclined also to attribute much of the catastrophe we're in right now to the ongoing occupation. But I would be remiss if I didn't ask you the question that, is posed by many of my Israeli interlocutors. They say, well, in Gaza, there hasn't been an occupation since 2006, since the Ariel Sharon's disengagement. And what did the Palestinians do with that freedom from the occupation? They used Gaza as a staging ground for attacks against Israel. They took the billions of dollars in aid and built networks of tunnels. They built very sophisticated rockets, et cetera, et cetera. How do you respond to that?
I mean, go and ask an international lawyer, go and ask the UN itself. They will tell you Gaza was not only occupied, Gaza was completely devastated because of Israel's besiegement and blockade for more than 17 years. A blockade from the air, from the land, from the sea. People in Gaza for more than 17 years were really put in a regime that did not allow them to exist in any.
Is that regime Israel or is that regime Hamas?
What have you? No, that regime, the besiegement and the blockade was an Israeli imposed blockade.
But because Hamas was launching rockets
for 17 years. No, I tell you, the blockade started long before this. And in fact, the Israeli attempts at separating Gaza from the West Bank started even before 2007. In fact, I was a student in the West Bank in the early 90s. You started by saying in Birzeit University, and in the year 1993, we were informed by our university that the Israeli occupation territories informed them that we cannot stay in the West Bank. We have to go back to Gaza and apply for special military permits and all that. And we had to stay almost on a wanted list, literally escaping from a place to a place. So we finished our degree. So the attempt to separate and the attempt to besiege Gaza and to attempt to carve Gaza out of the equation. So they rid themselves of 2.3 million Palestinians, who are the majority of whom are refugees like myself. I'd like you to remember that 80% of the Gaza population have been depopulated already. In 1948, our parents and grandparents, like myself, I was born in the Shabura refugee camp because my father and mother and my grandparents were actually depopulated, were ethnically cleansed, forced out of their homes. So that strategy has been going. So they actually finished the job in the West Bank because the real ideological greed is in the West Bank, not in Gaza. So I'm describing all that to tell you we understand the difficulty. And by the way, that's why Hamas is not part of the PLO until now, because there's dialogue happening. And until we reach a very solid national platform that we all agree, the PLO will remain with its commitments. And we are very clear on our commitments with our alliance with international legality. So there was an attempt in Cairo. There was serious dialogue in Cairo only last week. There were another round in Beijing only 3 months ago. So we will continue the dialogue, but the dialogue has to come up with a very clear outcome that will place the Palestinian political factions in where they should be, which is a national agreement, a national understanding of certain rules. Now, just want to end with this. Once we did that and offered the world the renewal of our democratic process in 2006, and if you remember, Hamas did win that elections, the legislative elections, the world boycotted our government. So, and laid siege on our government. So we need to make sure that we take serious steps in certain directions without harming and damaging our local, regional, and international standings.
Yeah. So thank you, Dr. Husam. You mentioned that there is now underway an attempted reconciliation process between the factions in Palestine, and I do want to get into that. One thing, there's another great scholar from Gaza who I also respect, and that's the pollster Khalil Shiqaqi. And he's been conducting polls, surveys of Palestinians for a number of years. And most recently, polls that he's been doing over the summer, the most recent one I think was in September, he shows that Palestinians support Hamas more than they support any other political faction, including the one you represent, Fatah. Why do you think that is?
First of all, in this dynamic, I represent the state of Palestine and the government of the state of Palestine.
Fair enough.
That is the PLO.
Forgive me. Yes.
And it is important, having said that, to make the distinction, because people mix up things, to make the distinction between the following levels, 4 levels. The first level is the state of Palestine. Now, the US does not recognize the state of Palestine, and in several occasions, incidents have actually objected, blocked, prevented delayed, what have you. But the state of Palestine exists. Legally, it exists. Politically, it exists. The only prevention is that we cannot exercise our sovereignty because of the state of military occupation. So you have the state of Palestine that has a seat in the UN. You have the government of the state of Palestine, that's the second level, which is the PLO. You have the PA, which was created by the PLO to undertake our, services, civil services and what have you, education, health, under Oslo. And then you have the people of Palestine, which have very solid and sophisticated civil society, private sector, and what have you.
Why do the people of Palestine prefer Hamas to anything else?
I'm describing this. So you are focusing on one level, which is the political factions.
Okay.
The political factions exist everywhere. You tell me the Democrats and the Republicans are really in perfect harmony, right? The political factions have their disagreements and issues. The most important thing is the national structures and the constitutional arrangements that will make sure that these disagreements are sorted. And the most important thing is these disagreements are always referred back to the people. That's what matters, because the people are the source of the legitimacy, the only source of the legitimacy. As for some statistics you are quoting, emotions go up and down. And if you conduct the opinion polls in Gaza, it will come out a bit differently than if you conduct it in the West Bank, because people will judge according to their own expectations, their own needs, issues of government. People always punish those who are in government, wherever they are. Don't rely on these statistics very much. What you need to distinguish is between Fatah as a national movement, as a national liberation movement, and the PA. I think many people have issues with the structures we created after Oslo, simply because Israel bulldozed Oslo, completely and utterly undermined Oslo, and therefore the delivery of the promises of Oslo has not materialized. And that's the key thing, that these structures were created so we could actually go in the direction of a state of Palestine that could provide for its people, defend its people. And we failed to do that because Israel made us fail, because it was from day one, since Rabin, the three attempts, since Rabin, and then Ehud Barak, and then the last was Olmert, we were never able to get to that. And I mentioned these three because the others were not interested altogether publicly.
Yeah. Well, the reason, sorry, forgive me, Your Excellency, the reason I'm asking this question, then I do want to move beyond Hamas, is just, I'm thinking of a kind of center-left Israeli who actually does want to have peace with Palestinians, might be the kind of Israeli who inhabited many of those kibbutzim in the Gaza envelope, who were actually quite progressive people who are opposed to the occupation of Palestine. And and those people will look at a statistic like the one that Dr. Shiqaqi discovered, or they'll look at the reluctance of Palestinian leadership to condemn what Hamas does, and they'll say, maybe the right wing is correct when they say that Palestinians will never reconcile themselves to our being in any part of the land between the river to the sea, because even after Hamas undertook October 7th, which was quite a horrific thing, and consequently brought about the horrific bombing of Benjamin Netanyahu, the Palestinians are still not willing to disavow that group. So I guess I'm trying to get you to explain to a potential Israeli ally of yours why this should not give them pause.
Because if they want partners for peace, they know the address. And I think I just described to you that Palestine has its legitimate national structures, including the PLO. And the PLO is very clear on its platform for a solution based on the international consensus, that is ending Israel's occupation, establishing a state, all sovereign state with East Jerusalem as its capital, and resolving the right of Palestinian refugees, the right of return in accordance with international legality. They're very clear. And of course, equality is a very important matter. Wherever Palestinians live, have to be treated equally under the law.
The right of return, sorry,
don't negotiate with me, Tarek. Now, this is not a round of negotiations. These are inalienable rights of people. These are non-negotiable rights. There is the collective right of return, and there is the individual right of return. The house that my father used to own is also my private property. Okay, and we need to find a solution not to brush people's rights under a carpet. We have to, if we mean a sustainable, long-term, lasting peace, we have to answer for the rights of people. But nonetheless, this is not the.
But your president, sorry, Afwan, I do. Your own president, Mahmoud Abbas, said, I believe it was in 2012, that the claims like the one that you just made are ones that he says the Palestinians should put down. He says, for me, Palestine is the 67 borders. That's now and forever. He's from Safad. I'm never going back to Safad. I'm never. Are you saying something different?
No, I'm not. Exactly. He said that there is the individual. So there is the individual rights of their own property. I mean, the entire West, including the US, is based on property rights. You're in the entire place you're sitting in is based on that premise, property rights. So if one person comes and says, I want my property back, we will have to deal with it, Tarek. We cannot just say, okay, peace has arrived, there is a lasting peace finally, and that one person has a claim on his home. So there has to be a process, and it happened before. Look at the Balkans, look at everywhere. It just, when it comes to Israel, it becomes the exception to every rule. I mean, no, we have rules that has to be applied equally on everybody. And this whole idea that they don't have partners is ridiculous. If they really want to pursue that, they will have partners in that direction. And this isn't about just partners. Look, the truth of the matter is, people think that Israel is really after Hamas. Israel is after two things. It's after the Palestinian people, and it's proven. And by the way, let me say this. On the 7th of October, and then a few hours later, the Israelis did not even allow us to feel anything or talk about anything. They came out at the level of the President of Israel, the Prime Minister of Israel, the Defense Minister of Israel, and they said Palestinian people are animals. The Palestinian people are responsible en masse, and we will target them, etc., etc. So of course we would be focused on protecting our people at that point in time. So if you have Israeli audience in this, or you are representing some of their thoughts, they need to really look back, search in their souls. Of course, a Palestinian will be worried about his own family, about his own people after that genocidal speech. We are not given a chance to even breathe because of the mindset of supremacy, because Israel has decided only mass violence is the only option they have, by the way, which is a source of weakness. Nothing left for Israel now except inflicting mass violence in Gaza, in the West Bank, in Lebanon, and everywhere they go. And if Israel wants to normalize itself in the region, in the Middle East, it doesn't happen through fighting the Middle East. Right. I mean, Israel has been fighting the Middle East for decades. So the Israeli psyche and mindset, this is a time for self-searching. The time for self-searching, because we have seen this before. This has been repeated many times. It's not going to produce security or stability, neither for us nor for them.
Your Excellency, we've talked a lot about the blame that Israel must shoulder. I want to ask two questions before opening up to the audience. The first question is just, what about the blame that the Palestinian leadership must shoulder? You mentioned, Your Excellency, that we, if I'm quoting you correctly, we have been conducting democratic processes in Palestine. This was by way of you pointing to the importance of the Palestinian will in directing the course of action of the country. But the fact of the matter is, you have a president who's 89 years old, who has been there since 2005. There have been no presidential elections since then, despite the fact they were supposed to. They've been postponed a number of times. So what do you say to those who say, no, this is the reason that the Palestinians have been incapable of pressing for their legitimate rights in international fora, because they actually don't have leadership that is democratically legitimate, that represents them. And the reason they don't have that is because they are led by a government that doesn't look terribly different from the autocratic governments that exist elsewhere in the Arab republics.
Well, what do I tell you? It's part of the game. It's part of the game for years and decades. Israel and some of its cronies would come and say, the problem is in this political leader and that leader. Remember Yasser Arafat? They made the whole...
Forget about that, Husam. Why don't you have elections?
They made the whole problem Israel. We do have elections. We are one of the few in the whole Middle East that conduct elections. Even Yasser Arafat, when he came back, Yasser Arafat is the father and the founder of the Palestinian National Movement.
Was I wrong when I said that Mahmoud Abbas hasn't run for election since 2005?
Let me finish.
Sorry,
even Yasser Arafat, when he came back to Palestine, he offered himself for elections, and he was, he was opposed. There were other candidates, and he won. And the same thing happened with President Abbas. He offered elections in 2005 and then parliamentary elections in 2006. And we discussed the international hypocrisy, international double standards when they laid siege on us, because they call for elections and democracy. But then when they have a different outcome, they boycott the whole results. Anyway, in our situation, there is that military occupation that controls our lives, every single aspect of our lives, including the convening of national elections. And we have been able to convene national elections when the occupation would not temper or intervene or block the unity of our territory and the unity of our polity. That is the political system. Now, of late, the Israeli occupation, because of the mindset I described to you, that they are set on undermining any possibility of a Palestinian state, and this is on the public record, Netanyahu and others have been saying it, they have been wanting to design an election process that will allow them to pocket Jerusalem, to sever Gaza, etc., etc. So we will not allow for elections to become the goal. Elections is a tool. It's a mean to an end, and the end is the unity of the Palestinian people, the unity of the Palestinian territory, and the unity of our political system. Of course, we have issues. But our problem is President Abbas. I mean, he is the person who came out from day one saying that he wants to seek peace based on the international consensus, and he is ready for a negotiated two-state solution. All these are pretexts, because when a regime like Israel is not interested in the direction that you and I want to go on, they will come up with all sorts of excuses, including, we don't like his height, his width, her color. The issue is there, it's not here. And let me clarify this. Who leads the Palestinian people is a Palestinian matter. It's our matter. We don't allow for anybody externally to discuss this. We have our institutions, we have our demands. Our people want to see their representative to be democratic. This is an internal matter that must be organic and continue being organic. Because if it is externally, we see it as a hostile intervention rather than friendly.
So, Your Excellency, I have many more questions, but I think it's incumbent on me now to open the floor to our audience. So I'm going to ask people to raise their hand, and then I will call on people who have raised their hands in the order in which they did so. While I'm collecting these raised hands, let me just ask you if you could answer as succinctly as possible. Just Your Excellency has said that the path to peace is clear. There must be recognition of the Palestinian right to self-determination in the West Bank and Gaza. What do you say? Let's imagine that were granted. What would the next day look like? I mean, what would, the Trump administration, for example, is spending a lot of time will be spending a lot of time thinking about post-conflict governance in Gaza. And many people are concerned that the Palestinian institutions have not demonstrated their capacity for self-governance. So how would that capacity be demonstrated and built up?
I mean, there were countries that gained their independence without any capacity, and then they built it. In Asia, in Africa, if you go back to the record, you will find some countries gained their independence without having one doctor. Do I tell you what is the Palestinian capacity right now? First, international institutions, including the World Bank, has already described our national institutions 20 years ago to be at the level of middle-income countries. And our nation, Tarek, I mean, our nation are very well known of actually building every country they go to. We are made of very educated, extremely educated, one of the highest in the region, if not the world. We have almost zero illiteracy rate. We have one of the highest PhD per capita graduates. We have the youngest population. Can you imagine, can you begin to imagine the potential, the potential for prosperity, for growth, for collaboration and cooperation, for the nation of Palestine and the state of Palestine to be back, because we were once, before all this started, to be back as a cradle of civilizations. And we were, and we are the cradle of civilizations, to be back the hub between East and West, the bridge between East and West. And I am certain that the first day of ending occupation will be a day of prosperity, a day of collaboration, cooperation, and the marriage between, wealth, technology, and between human resources will produce something that the Middle East has been longing for, which is, their people can actually have a good life and can have the basic requirements of a decent life. So I am certain that the first day of ending occupation will be a day that you and I, Tarek, will be celebrating.
Inshallah. So we have a first question from Adil Hamaizia of the Middle East Initiative. Please, sir.
Hi, Ambassador. Hi, Professor. You can hear me clearly, right?
Yes, sir.
Great. Greetings. Thank you, Ambassador Husam. Adil Mak, Jazairi, your own friend. I hope all is well. Thanks so much. Professor Masoud usually tells me off for a very long question, so I'm going to follow the simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. One thing we haven't covered on the amazing conversation is just the role of the region, the Middle East, particularly the GCC. You sort of focused on the preeminent power, the US, the indispensable nation, the US. Could you just say a little bit on your thoughts on the role of players in the region thus far? What can change moving forward? We saw the words from Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman earlier this week. Your thoughts and expectations going into 2025. Thank you.
Thank you, Adil. Excellent question.
Thank you, Adil, and let me use the opportunity to convey our love to Algeria. And Algeria now is leading the Arab side in the Security Council, and they're doing a great job in advancing a draft resolution at this very difficult moment. So our love and appreciation to Aljazair and Habib Adil. As for the Arab world, and Algeria is a leading member of the Arab world, well, at the beginning of this whole thing, I have to say there was a lack of unity and clarity. It's obvious, but that unity and clarity has come, and it's coming. It took some time. We wish it was a bit faster, but it has come. And you have seen the summit in Riyadh only a few days ago, and you have seen the clarity by all Arab states around that table at the level of presidents and kings and crown princes. And you have heard the crown prince of Saudi Arabia, the clarity that this is a genocide and it must end, and it must end now, that there will not be a solution without the core of issues, which is the issue of Palestine, and there will not be normalization without establishing a state of Palestine. But that unity needs now to bring around it a bigger circles of unity elsewhere in the world, main countries in Asia, in Africa, in Europe, to make sure that if the US goes in the direction of the Arab and the international consensus, we prepare the grounds. If the US goes in the opposite direction, we actually isolate that position and reduce any damage possible. So there is a strategic need for the Arab world to actually come together and be united. And I can finally say that this is happening with a clarity that cannot be second-guessed, if I can use that term. But also there is a need to press ahead at the humanitarian side to make sure that our people are not being killed via starvation and via the use of disease. And we need to work more with our Arab partners and brothers and sisters to make sure that Israel doesn't actually have a veto power or a permission to who eats and who doesn't, who get treated in a hospital and who doesn't. This is the bare minimum, and I think our work with our Arab partners is paramount in this area.
So thank you. I have a question in the chat from Dr. Sophia Goodfriend. So let me ask that, and then I'll come to Yusuf Shahid and Barak Sella. The question that Dr. Goodfriend is asking, she says, the last year in the West Bank has been marked by a sharp increase in terror and military violence. Alongside a security crisis, reports of financial challenges are rampant as Israel's government withholds tax revenue and donor states cut back funding since October 7th. So Dr. Goodfriend is asking you, Your Excellency, can you speak about how the situation unfolding in the West Bank is impacting the Palestinian Authority's ability to govern and to operate? And what do these challenges mean for plans proposed by the international community to have the PA help govern Gaza if and when the current war ends?
Thank you for that question. Number one, for Gaza, there will not be any solution any day after without the Palestinian national institutions uniting Palestinian territory and people. So it will only be the PLO, the state of Palestine and the PLO that will be in charge and can assign national structures to make sure that Gaza is provided for given the calamity and given the situation that you all know about. Number two, you are absolutely right. In the West Bank, the situation is extremely and utterly critical. It's at a tipping point. Settlements are expanding. Creeping annexation is happening. Remember, Smotrich is the landlord of the West Bank now. Settler terrorism is on the rise, unprecedented, and you've seen only recently burning cars just a few meters away from the center of Ramallah, burning cars and homes and properties and what have you, with the full tacit support of the state that is sponsoring the settlements, that is Israel, and the government that is sponsoring the settlements. The checkpoints in the West Bank are now killing fields, and not only killing physically, but killing spirit and killing time, and people are unable to travel, people are unable to move, not able to go to their work, to their education. The situation in the West Bank is becoming literally suffocating to anybody who wants to function, even in a semi-normal situation. But add to that what you just mentioned in your question. Netanyahu and his government are on an onslaught against the Palestinian national institutions, against the PA. They have withheld considerable amount of our own money. This is our money, Professor, I forgot the name, sorry. This is our own money. And now Smotrich is also using the blackmail tool of cutting our banking sector from communicating to the world, and this will collapse the Palestinian economy. So the plan in the West Bank is clear. They want to collapse the economy. They want to collapse the Palestinian Authority. They want to collapse any remnants, any symbol of statehood, any nucleus of a state. So you are absolutely right. And we haven't mentioned Jerusalem, which is part of the West Bank, the occupied West Bank. The situation in Jerusalem is, again, at a tipping point because of the attempts at changing the status quo, the attempts at provoking our people in Jerusalem, the Smotrich childish approach of always provoking and always invading Al-Aqsa Mosque, etc., etc., and all the groups and the ideologies that we are going to rebuild the temple. You know, this is very, very dangerous territory. And you know very well, the world knows that Jerusalem is the flashpoint. If anything happens in Jerusalem, it gets everywhere in a split of a second. So we hope, and we really hope that your question brings everything to focus, that this is not just about Gaza, and this is not just about Hamas or the 7th of October. History has begun 76 years ago on the one hand, and on the other hand, the project by Israel is much bigger, and the real focus is on the West Bank. And that's why we are trying our best to save what could we save, to bring about regional and international alliances, and to be set on the way forward rather than look backward.
Your Excellency, we have about 10 minutes left, and so with your permission, I'd like to take the next two questions, and then you could answer both of them as you see fit, if that's agreeable. So I will first call on Dr. Youssef Shahid and then on Barak Sella. So Dr. Shahid, please go ahead.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Ambassador, for this excellent talk. You mentioned the huge Palestinian potential and the education level, which is important. But politically speaking, apart from important efforts of Ambassador Husam and some others, frankly, we did not see the Palestinian political leaders. We don't see political Palestinian initiative. We don't see Palestinian delegation that travel internationally to meet the big decision makers and bring the Palestinian questions as of the time of Arafat, if you remember that. And then internally, you mentioned, Ambassador, that there is negotiation between Palestinian factions. I know that there is a war going on and we certainly can't make elections, but don't you think that this is a good time and that there is a good opportunity now for the different Palestinian factions to sit together and propose a single and credible interlocutor in front of the international community? And why they cannot reach agreement through internal discussion? We don't need to wait for election. Why to wait for an outside patronage? Why we cannot do it internally, given the intense situation that you described? Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you, Your Excellency. Dr. Youssef Chahid, for those who don't know, is the former Prime Minister of Tunisia. I will come to now the last question from Barak Sella. So please go ahead, Barak.
Thank you, Professor, and thank you, Ambassador, for your insights. Earlier in the conversation, you made a comparison between Hamas and the extreme right-wing elements in Israeli society. A difference that I would like to point out is that in Israel, while we have extremist elements, there, like in any proper state around the world, there's a monopoly over violence. There is one state and one weapon, as we might say, under the IDF, and there is a strict structure of how to create and how to execute violence. While we see in Palestinian society, there has not been a situation where there has been able to consolidate the Palestinian people under one weapon, as you would say. One of the main issues for Israelis is security assurances that we saw were breached on October 7th. So my question is, will the government of Palestine, Palestinian people, call for disarming Hamas? And what are the security assurances that the Palestinians are willing to give the Israelis so that we will be able to consider removing settlements and paying the dear price that Israeli society might pay in such a situation?
Thank you. Thank you for that, Barak. So two really excellent questions. The first about why the Palestinians have really been unable to unify their political ranks and identify a credible singular interlocutor, and the question that Barak Sella is asking, which is, what are the credible security guarantees that Palestinians can offer to the Israelis?
Thank you very much, Ustaz Youssef Chahid. Thank you for your question. And I add my voice to yours that Palestinian unity and Palestinian dialogue is absolutely crucial, strategic, needed. And no one needs it more than the Palestinian people. I mean, there are such clarity by the Palestinian people that this is the direction they want to see. And let both of us wish them good luck, because I am gathering that the conversations, the dialogue, the talks in Cairo has really picked up. And yes, we need to see that unity and that clarity of Palestinian orientation. However, let me make the distinction that the Palestinians do speak in one voice. And I want to clarify this. We do have an address. The Palestinians are not without an address. The Palestinian people are not leaderless. Now we have issues, and all these issues are legitimate. We need to convene elections. We must democratize, reforms, all that. But we do have an address, not to mix these two things. Even Hamas wants to be part of that address, part of the PLO, but nobody says we are going to establish a new address for the Palestinian people. No one says that. And that address is the interlocutor of the world, and that address needs to be the umbrella under which all these dialogues are happening. And I understand the importance. We all understand the significance at a point when your people are going through a war of extermination, that you are united. I understand. But I also want to draw to your attention, Your Excellency, former Prime Minister, to your attention that the Palestinian people are united. We are a united people. We are united in our national goals. We are united in our culture. We are united in our cuisine. We are united in everything. Every Palestinian will hail for you where they come from, what's their best sort of cultural background. We are united, and look, whatever happens in the West Bank reflected itself in Gaza and vice versa. And look at the Palestinian diaspora and refugees and those in exile. As a people, we are united. As a structure, as representation, we also have that unity. The problem is with political factions. And again, I very much support that these political factions must solve their differences and come up with an agreement that really reflect the unity of our people and reflect the unity of our political system. Hamas cannot be compared to extremist element in Israel because in Israel there is the IDF. I agree, but from the other perspective, that you cannot compare a non-state actor to a state actor. The responsibility of a state actor, Barak, is so different than the responsibility of a non-state actor. So the responsibilities of a state actor are very well defined. A state has to behave in a certain manner that is in accordance with its own laws and with international law. And if that state is an occupying power, then there are all sets of rules that are very clear that they have to provide for the people under their occupation, not starve them. If the IDF uses starvation, this is way worse than any other crime. So the monopoly of the use of power, the monopoly of the use of violence was created, so it is regulated. So it is not, it doesn't get in the hands of groups and entities, so they inflict on all of us. That's why the state was entrusted to be the best holder of that monopoly of violence. But in Israel's case, that is absolutely and utterly misused, abused in a way that has turned the whole machine into a machine of mass violence. So yes, state actors has to be held and beholden to certain standards that I have to tell you, Israel has completely and utterly violated every single human rule and every single international rule here. But as for issues of security, I'll tell you one thing, and from my heart. You cannot begin to discuss structures of security, of economic cooperation, of prosperity, of stability, without resolving the issues. Putting the horse before the cart is a business that has gone on for 30 years, and look where we are today.
You mean the cart before the horse?
The cart before the horse, yes, sorry. You cannot put the cart before the horse. Thank you, Tarek, for correcting me. And you know, in this incident, the cart is security. And for 30 years, Israel wants security while they are in full control of the Palestinian people, full control, full military occupation. And guess what? I'll add to you. They also expect that the Palestinian people will provide security for them while being under occupation, under the full security control of the occupier. So we should provide security, not only for the Israeli occupying forces, but also for the settlers. This logic has not worked, and it will not work. And that's why it's very important that we remove ourselves from that doctrine, from that framework of thinking, because it's not going to lead anywhere. And we put ourselves like every other case. Barak, look at what happened in Northern Ireland. Look at the Northern Irish experience. Look at the Balkans and what happened there. Look at South Africa. Look at East Timor. I can quote you many, many examples. Security, peace, prosperity, cooperation, open borders, all happen once you resolve the political issues. Once political leaders come around the table and really realize that this is the building block, the cornerstone for all the above. So let's not keep talking about the cart all the time. And I assure you, and go back to the Arab Peace Initiative, go back to the PLO statements, go back to what happened over the last 30 years. I assure you that once a political resolution is reached, security arrangements, economic arrangements, all that, including normalization, will be reached on solid grounds. The other way around simply doesn't work.
Your Excellency, we have only scratched the surface of what we could talk to you about. I have in the chat dozens of superb questions that we could pose to you, all of which is to say that Your Excellency owes us an in-person visit to your old stomping grounds at Harvard so that we can continue this conversation. I have in my head maybe the overly optimistic idea that I could even have you sit down with some of our students from both Palestine, but also students from Israel, and have a kind of meeting of the minds and hearts about how we can bring this conflict to an end. All I have to do now is thank you. I think everybody who attended this event now knows that they have in you not just a formidable intellect, but someone who is fundamentally humane and committed to the coexistence side by side of the Israeli and the Palestinian people. And I hope that when you do come and visit us at Harvard, the bloodshed currently underway will be at an end, and the process of healing will have begun, a process that I know Your Excellency will play a leading role in. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Masoud, and thank you all.
Thank you all, and I want to thank the audience. I want to note that we'll be meeting again on Zoom December 19th to speak with Tzipi Livni. Thank you all for your excellent questions. Thank you to His Excellency. Thank you to our team at the Middle East Initiative, including Paige Ferreira and Julia Martin, who produced this event. And God willing, we'll see you all again soon. Thank you.